In a world where power and justice collide, one woman stood quietly on the sidelines of history, Claudia, wife of Pontius Pilate. As the crowd roared for Jesus' condemnation, Claudia was in a moral whirlwind, torn between her loyalty to her husband and the undeniable innocence of the man before her. As each twist and turn took its course, her internal battle heightened, and what happened next would change her forever. Join us as we delve deep into this thrilling story of power, guilt, and that unforgettable moment when the greatest injustice in history was perpetrated right in front of her. Join us as we look deeper into the quiet woman who stood at the crossroads of history, holding the power to alter fate with a single word. Claudia Procula, the wife of Pontius Pilate, is hardly mentioned in historical literature, though she was present at events that would change the course of history. As the wife of the Roman governor of Judea, Claudia watched with silent vigilance as the situation around her began to deteriorate. But who was this woman, standing at the center of Jesus' trial and crucifixion, holding a secret that could have changed everything? Claudia was noted for the subtlety of her beauty and her Roman roots, and she had arrived in Jerusalem with Pilate when he took over the province's government. While Pilate faced the pressures of the place, religious and political, Claudia lived a reserved but attentive life. As the wife of a famous man, she could gain entry into places few would dare tread, and it was in such settings that Jesus' presence slowly became more real to her, almost imperceptibly so. While most of the Roman nobles disregarded stories about Jesus as mere tales, Claudia could not shut out the presence of this man. With every report about his miracles and teachings, she felt rising curiosity. News of the power of Jesus among people stirred something inside her. She couldn't quite realize what that was. Like many of her time, Claudia Procula lived her life torn between the values of her Roman culture and the mystery of Jesus. This inner dualism only increased in Claudia as Jesus' fate gradually reached a crossroads. She could not understand how a man preaching peace and love could be perceived to be threatening the power of Rome. And with each passing day, something within her signaled that, indeed, Pilate was to play the most fateful role in this story. It grew stronger, leading Claudia to experiences that were to change her. Living alongside Pontius Pilate meant a life of privileges but also a certain discomfort for Claudia. She was a respectable wife, being the spouse of the Roman governor of Judea, but she also carried the weight of closely witnessing the role Pilate played in that land of constant tensions. She watched the challenges he faced, yet she didn't agree with all of the choices and policies that he adopted to keep such passionate people in the unstable region under control. For Claudia, who observed the scenes of the battle on the streets and the triumph of the Romans over the Jews, it was not associated with comfort. Contrary to this, the more she was exposed to the bleakness of the environment she found herself in, the more she felt that the empire to which she belonged was fighting an enemy that was grounded on a divine principle, faith, as she could not quite grasp, but faith she could herself see was profound. And the figure of Jesus, an increasingly famous name to gain more supporters in Jerusalem, was the opposite of everything the Roman culture was trying to suppress. His authority, a way of instilling fear and demanding compliance, made Claudia uncomfortable as the wife of Pilate. She could not afford to watch her husband dealing with crises in Jerusalem with such ruthlessness, especially among the Antichrist followers of Jesus. To Pilate, the carpenter was an opponent of the state, and while Claudia felt that there was something different, something special about this faith was increasingly winning the hearts of the people. Her heart told her that she knew better than her own culture to deny her deep intuition about Jesus because she had been baptized as a Christian. Far more painful for her were the moments that prepared a major decision that Pilate would have to make. Claudia, who possessed good intuition for such things, understood that the tension was growing around Jesus, and soon her husband would have to make a choice, Jesus' fate. Her heart squeezed at the thought that Pilate was chosen to be at the helm and passing judgment on the face of someone people had so earnestly placed their hope on as their savior. The fact that Claudia found herself struggling between responsibility and what her personal feelings informed her puts her in the conviction that this would transform her. What if a single dream, one that shook her to the core, held the power to change the course of history? Next, let's explore how Claudia's vision would push her to take a stand that could defy everything she knew. One night, Claudia had a dream that left her greatly troubled. It wasn't just any dream. She saw Jesus standing amid a lot of light, and the weightiness of suffering seemed to burden him. He strode, calm-faced, and stared at the horizon as if he didn't know what was in store for him. This particular dream shook her to the core, and she woke up in a cold sweat, still feeling the intensity of Jesus' stare. Normally, Claudia tried to dismiss such visions she had periodically, however, this time, something was different. That dream had a call she could not understand, an unbearable need to protect Jesus, to ascertain that he was unharmed. She had no doubts that something terrible would occur if Pilate proceeded with the verdict. Still in confusion and with sad feelings inside, Claudia went to Pilate that morning. She opened her eyes wide, and with a shaky voice, she pleaded with him not to participate in the condemnation of Jesus. She attempted, as far as she could, to persuade him that this judgment was not political nor religious but spiritual. It was something beyond the jurisdiction of Rome and the law. She narrated the dream to Pilate and then explained how her soul was consumed with anguish that Pilate could not overlook. Pilate looked at the situation practically and did not believe Claudia's words. To him, that was nothing more than a dream of his wife and was a mere inconvenience. He attempted to reassure her with rough words, but Claudia got the feeling that her shrill cry went unanswered. She realized that if Jesus were condemned, something bad would occur, which left her helpless to fear for the future of all those surrounding her. Despite all the efforts she could make to avert the tragedy, she was fully convinced that the end was inevitable and that perception was going to torment her for the rest of the days that followed in what she would describe as a living nightmare. Claudia was still affected by the dream days after and was caught with a difficult decision to make. She felt the need to prevent Pilate from passing any verdict on Jesus, but she well understood that this meant risking the dignity her husband had for her. However, she still felt the urge to deal with Pilate. She realized this was an opportunity to speak or remain silent for the rest of her life with the conscience of the tragedy. The next morning, Claudia steeled herself and went to Pilate. Her face resembled the pale corpse, which was depicted in anguish and chronic fear. More softly but seriously, she stressed once more that she should never touch the judgment of Jesus. Softly pleading, she said that Jesus was innocent and something much greater was at work here. Claudia pleaded with Pilate that the empire should not be blamed for sending an innocent person to the cross, but Pilate reacted bitterly. To him, Claudia was being controlled by a sheer sense of superstition, which he feared affected her logic. Pilate listened to the pressures and understood that, as the governor, he ought to make concrete decisions. The Romans could not allow a slip or weakness, and most importantly, they were ahead of a man whom many deemed a threat. Claudia could see Pilate's rigor and the need to accomplish his duties. But she tried one last time to convince him. She pleaded with him to at least think before arriving at the decision, but Pilate gave her a cold shoulder. Claudia realized that no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't get through to the thick skin of the Pilate. As Pilate prepared for trial, she felt that a sad moment was coming her way. Would you like the continuation or any edits? The whole city of Jerusalem had been overcast with dark and oppressive clouds after the verdict. Claudia observed Pilate, who remained silent following the trial. She realized that his act of washing his hands before the crowd would not suffice to clear his conscience. The guilt, she knew, would never be forgotten. For Claudia, the burden felt even deeper. She believed the real struggle was far greater. The appearance of Christ, who did not utter a word when accused, now consumed her thoughts. Each passing moment confirmed that her attempts to protect Jesus had been futile. All that remained was to stand at a distance and watch the events of the next few hours unfold. As the day progressed, the palace took on a strange, silent atmosphere, as if everyone knew something irreversible had occurred. Claudia felt small and helpless, a mere witness to a tragedy she could not prevent. The voices and cries of the crowd echoed in her mind, and she knew the shadow of this event would forever hang over her and her husband. When rumors reached her that Jesus was being tortured, she was devastated. Try as she might, she couldn't shake the image of the innocent man she had seen only once but could never forget. Now, Jesus was in the hands of cruel soldiers determined to destroy him both physically and spiritually. Claudia felt powerless, her anguish real as she braced herself to witness an irreparable atrocity. The news that arrived only deepened her despair. Jesus had been beaten, humiliated, and crowned with thorns. The soldiers mocked him with incomprehensible cruelty, treating him as a dangerous criminal. Claudia could not understand how a man who preached peace, love, and compassion could endure such brutality. Each new report amplified her guilt, as if the world itself was sinking into darkness. Her intuition, her pleas, and even her dream had warned her that something terrible was inevitable. Despite her repulsion toward the situation, a painful curiosity compelled Claudia to learn more about Jesus' suffering. It felt as if his pain was part of a greater plan, something beyond human understanding, leaving her torn between fear and reverence. Claudia realized she could not alter Jesus' fate. She was merely a powerless spectator, caught between Roman authority and the mystery surrounding this man. At that moment, her life was irreversibly changed. Claudia had always avoided becoming involved in her husband's political dilemmas. But in an unexpected moment, her eyes met Jesus' gaze. That brief encounter profoundly moved her. Jesus' face was serene, his eyes reflecting a silent and complete understanding even amidst suffering. In those few seconds, Claudia experienced something she had never felt before. His gaze held a silent strength and overwhelming compassion, as if he could peer into the souls of all who looked upon him. Though fleeting, the encounter left Claudia deeply unsettled. She saw in him a mystery that offered hope yet filled her with an inexplicable fear. The memory of his gaze lingered, a presence that followed her everywhere, as though Jesus foresaw everything with serene acceptance. Amidst the terror and desperation, his calm demeanor radiated a force Claudia could not comprehend. She was torn, wishing desperately that Pilate had listened to her pleas to spare Jesus. Yet, she knew it was too late. On the day of the crucifixion, Claudia was beside herself. In her silent chambers, she learned that Jesus had been nailed to the cross, a cruel and degrading end. Still, amidst the violence, there was a strange peace in the air. Though she didn't dare follow the procession, her thoughts remained fixated on Jesus' suffering. It felt as if an invisible force connected her to every step he took along the Via Dolorosa, every fall, and every blow he endured. She retreated to a corner of the palace, attempting to pray or meditate, seeking solace from her anguish. As the crucifixion approached, Claudia foresaw the terrible scene. The mental images of Jesus nailed to the cross overwhelmed her. When the news came that Jesus had been raised on the cross, she couldn't hold back her tears. Though she didn't fully understand who Jesus was, she sensed that he carried a sacred purpose. His death was not merely the loss of an innocent life but seemed to mark the end of hope and light. Claudia vividly remembered Jesus' physical appearance, a man whose features reflected the labor and simplicity of life in that region. Dark-skinned and marked by time spent outdoors, he blended in with the crowds. Yet, there was something profoundly different about him, an unexplainable depth in his presence. His brown eyes, dark hair, and humble demeanor spoke of wisdom and compassion. To Claudia, Jesus embodied an extraordinary essence beyond human comprehension. Pilate, under immense pressure from the people and religious leaders, struggled with his decision. Claudia could see the inner conflict tormenting her husband. Though accustomed to making impartial judgments, Pilate seemed bound by something intangible in Jesus' presence. Jesus remained silent, his quiet strength defying the accusations against him. When the crowd demanded his crucifixion, Claudia felt their pain as her own. She realized her worst fears had come true, and there was nothing more she could do to stop it. The events following the crucifixion left Claudia questioning everything. Reports began to circulate that Jesus had risen from the dead. At first, she dismissed them as rumors, but as more credible accounts emerged even from Roman witnesses, she began to believe. Claudia's dream, her intuition, and her earlier encounters with Jesus now felt like fragments of a divine revelation. She realized she had witnessed something sacred, something that transcended human understanding. The resurrection transformed Claudia. She knew Jesus' life and death carried eternal meaning, a love and peace that surpassed all earthly constraints. The veil had been lifted from her eyes, revealing a new truth and faith that would remain with her forever. Claudia's journey from doubt to faith reminds us that the greatest truths often come from the most unexpected places.